here we are in Shanghai on the 39th floor of the Hilton. And now we've talked about diversity, and we're going to talk now a little bit about entrepreneurship. And we're very lucky to have two entrepreneurs with us here, Laura and John, that will talk to us a little bit about their experience here in China. Good evening, Laura.
Good evening.
Tell us about your story.
All right. Well, you asked, how does one become an entrepreneur? And I really don't know. It just sort of happens sometimes. In my case, I was in Washington, D.C., studying at Georgetown and had just finished a year at the Bocconi in Italy. Came back, I'd forgotten my second theology class, and Georgetown is Jesuit, so I had to stay there for an extra semester. And then I was stuck with the choice of continuing to work in D.C. or going back to Italy to work in consulting. And I really had spent a whole day in China about 5 years before, had this strange feeling in Guangzhou that I was in Italy, only because Italians and Chinese think in a similar way. And I thought, well, rather than go back to Italy or go back to New York, I'll come to China. It's a bit of both. So I knew something about wine because I passed an AP chemistry exam by making wine for my science project when I was 12. And that, I guess, made me an expert. So I didn't know they made wine in Australia, but I tasted this wine, and it was actually very good. I learned French along the way, too, because I went to this winemaking school in Burgundy thinking that in the middle of the countryside nobody would really speak much English, and that was how I learned French, sort of second round of learning French, but it worked because nobody spoke English. So I did know something about wine. The wine was good. My best friend from kindergarten happened to be visiting that week, was looking for a job, and her family owned a vineyard in Napa, and the next thing you know, you had Forsyth Cellars, which is the wine company that you visited today. But it started out in Hong Kong, so I got very rapidly bored with the Hong Kong market, which, by the way, I had no time to make a business plan or anything else. It was, do you want to buy 100 cases of wine? And because they had the netball player who was the secretary of the general manager of the accounting firm, the managing partner, who was selling wine, I sort of somehow acquired the goodwill of this company along with it without much time to analyze it, and off we went. But you could feel that this was an area that had immense potential, and obviously you put some numbers together. It took a while to investigate the market, but it's been a market that has chopped and changed ever since. Hong Kong was tiny. I came up to China way too early in the game for anybody with hindsight because I spread myself too thin. But on the other hand, it was a point of difference. And because I was competing with Seagram's and United Distillers and all the big companies, International Distillers, Pernod Ricard, you had to have a point of difference, and most of them were either in Hong Kong, nobody was really in China. Cognac houses were here. So gradually tried to build up this business on both sides of the border. It was interesting for me. It was all in education. They said, my Chinese friend said, it's your own MBA, your own doctorate, whatever you want to call it, just trying to figure things out. But we had a monopoly in those days, so we had to work with the monopoly, but the monopoly didn't do things according to the law, and you couldn't figure out what the law really was. And oh goodness, that's why I keep recommending Mr. China, because that was what the environment was for the first.
That's a book, Mr. China, that she's recommended that everybody read.
It's a funny book, but it's the true story of the first venture capitalist in China, and that was the environment that all of us operated in.
Well, John, what do you think? Can you relate to any of that?
Well, I think Laura and I have an interesting contrast, because Laura is, if I may say, is the true entrepreneur. She grew up and lived and breathed as an entrepreneur right through her. I came from big corporate. I grew up through Exxon, and knew and lived and breathed and continue to live and breathe to a certain degree through my clients, big clients, I would say certainly for the 25 years I've been doing business, half of it has been with billion-dollar companies. And so living and breathing all the corporate politics and understanding how you need to navigate your own personal career within a large corporation is how I've managed a lot of part of my career. I would certainly say the early part. However, I would say within the last part of my career has been very entrepreneurial. You need to go there and experience how fast China is changing. But you know what? The world's changing really fast. And I think the experience that you guys are all bringing to this table, I think really blows me away as to if you look at the brain trust, I think if you could all add what you have, I think that is the real value of what I think you guys are paying for. And you guys really should capitalize on that. China, if it's a place that you could spend that capital, all the better. We'll be happy to help you spend it. But you have such a huge brain trust built up here, you can really capitalize on it.